let's get started. Anubrata, do you want to present?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Anubrata Deka. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today I will be presenting on the economic impacts of private politics and corporate social responsibility on food fraud. So the food companies are investing in CSR activities, and when these food companies invest in CSR, they develop a reputation of being a responsible citizen of the world. And this further provides them an insurance-like protection, which the firms can use for future negative publicity. And many of these firms who are investing in CSR are also providing credence attribute. And because of the nature of the attribute, there is information asymmetry, and firms have an incentive to engage in fraudulent behavior. So together, firms may choose to exploit the trust which public places on them by engaging in fraudulent behavior. The food sector at the same time are also facing increased pressure from social activist organizations such as the Changing Markets Foundation, Greenpeace, where they have exerted pressure on food companies for making false and misleading claims. And in fact, many of the food companies who are under scrutiny by different activist organizations have invested heavily on CSR. So one such example is the case of Nestle. So Nestle has invested heavily on CSR. One example is that Nestle had initiated the program called Nestle for Healthier Kids, where they were educating young kids for the importance of healthy diet. But Nestle at the same time has been under scrutiny where, for example, the Changing Markets Foundation had launched the Busting Myth campaign against Nestle. They said that Nestle falsely claimed that its infant milk formula is closest to breast milk. So given this issue, there has been a few studies which has looked into how an activist chooses a target firm to whom they will exert social pressure. For example, Barron in 2009 argued that if firms differ in their motivation in investing in CSR, and if citizens are unable to find the true motivation of the firm, then the activists will target morally motivated firm. On the other hand, King and McDonald in 2015 argued that if a firm belongs to the top tier, if the firm is very reputable firm, then it attracts more activist attention and thus making them a likely target. However, the literature, the issue was that all the studies, the primary objective of the activists was to improve the voluntary provision of credence attribute. But there has been no studies which looks into the impact CSR have on the incentive of the activists to target a firm, given the objective of the activists is to remove fraudulent behavior from the market. So to do this, this study develops a game theoretic framework to answer two questions. First, how a firm's CSR investment impacts its decision to misrepresent the quality claims it will make, and the actual quality it would provide of the credence attribute, and how CSR impacts the decision of the activist to monitor the firm to expose fraudulent quality claims. So in the game theoretic model, I have basically two firms and two products. Firm H provides good H, which is a credence good, and firm L provides good L, which is a basic good. Firm H chooses the quality it will provide and the claims it will make about the quality. Both firms chooses the respective prices. Also, firm H has invested in CSR and it's denoted by Z. The cost of providing credence attribute is assumed to be fixed. We have a continuum of heterogeneous consumers who prefer credence attribute. Here, UH is the utility consumers get if they consume good H, and UL is the utility they would get from consuming good L. The third player in the market is the activist, whose objective is to increase market transparency by uncovering fraud and eliminating false and misleading quality claims. Now the activist incurs utility loss from not knowing whether the firm has misrepresented the quality. It is denoted by Y. The activist also experiences utility loss if fraud exists in the market, and this loss depends on how big of a gap is there between the claimed quality and the actual quality. The maximum utility the activist would obtain when she challenges the firm and she succeeds in removing fraudulent quality claims is denoted by capital beta. So the strategic interaction between the firm and the activist is captured by this 5-stage game. In stage 1, firm H chooses the quality. Then in stage 2, firm H will choose what claims they will make. In stage 3, activist observes the claim and chooses whether to monitor the firm and not monitor the firm. If the activist chooses not to monitor the firm, the game ends. But if the activist chooses to monitor the firm, they will find out what the actual quality of the firm's product is. So if there is no fraud, then the game ends. But if the activist finds that there is a fraud, they will launch a campaign where they will choose how much effort they would want to put in. Firm H at the same time would choose to contest the campaign and they will choose the effort. A contest game is played which succeeds with probability theta and fails with 1 minus theta. Now here, if the campaign succeeds, the firm will revise the claim and truthfully claim, but the firm will also face a reputational harm. So in this model, the reputational harm is captured by how consumers revise their perceived quality. So greater is the reputational harm, lower will be the perceived quality of the consumers about firm's product. Now, if the campaign fails, the firm will continue to make fraudulent quality claims. So in this model, the impact of CSR is captured by 2 effects. So I have the CSR campaign effect. So if a firm has invested in CSR, then it is more effective. Its effectiveness in contesting the campaign increases because of the public trust. Public views the firm as being a good firm. So, and this is captured by alpha Z. So, and first order, this alpha, the derivative of alpha with respect to Z is positive. The second effect is the CSR reputational harm effect. So in this case, if the firm has invested in CSR, then it would face a greater reputational harm if the activist succeeds in convincing the consumers that the firm has made fraudulent quality claims. This is because the consumers would feel cheated. So the game is solved using backward induction. These are the Nash equilibrium prices, quantities, and profits of firm H, L, and activist. And it depends on where the game ends. So in stage 4, a campaign is launched. The probability of the success of the campaign is expressed by this expression. In this stage, both firm and the activist chooses the level of effort they would exert to contest the campaign. Solving these are the optimal effort of the firm and the activist. And when we substitute these F star and E star back into the probability function, this is the probability of the success of the campaign. We can see that greater is the gap between the claim and actual quality, the campaign is more likely to succeed. And if the firm is more effective in contesting the campaign is more likely to succeed. And also, if the firm faces a greater reputational harm, the probability of the success of the campaign also it decreases. This is because if the firm faces a greater reputational harm, they would exert higher effort and reduce the likelihood of the activist winning the campaign. So moving on to stage 3, here the activist chooses whether to monitor or not monitor the firm. And this decision is made by comparing the payoff associated with both options. So this is the condition we derive. So here mu is the belief of the activist if there is fraudulent quality claims in the market. So greater is the belief of the activist. It is more likely that the activist will monitor the firm. We find that the activist will always find it optimal to monitor the firm if the cost of monitoring is strictly less than the utility loss the activist would experience from not knowing whether there is fraud in the market. And also we find that if the CSR investment of the firm rises, the activist is less likely to monitor the firm. We can in fact find the cutoff for even CSR by equating the profits associated with not monitoring and monitoring of the activist, and is captured by ZC. So what we find is that if the CSR investment is less than ZC, the activist will choose to monitor the firm. In stage 2, the firm chooses whether to misrepresent or to truthfully claim. it depends on whether the activist chooses to monitor or not monitor the firm. If the activist finds it optimal to monitor the firm in stage 3, then the firm will choose to misrepresent if the profit associated with misrepresenting is greater than when it truthfully claims. And we find this expression. So what this implies is that the firm is more likely to misrepresent if it faces lower reputational harm, when the firm is more effective in contesting the campaign, when the firm can claim higher quality, and when the firm actually provides a lower quality. Now moving on to the impact of CSR on the decision to misrepresent. Now in this case, it depends on whether the CSR campaign effect dominates the CSR reputation harm effect or vice versa. If CSR reputation harm effect dominates the CSR campaign effects, then for lower values of CSR investments of the firm H will find it optimal to misrepresent. And in case 2, if the CSR campaign effect dominates the CSR reputation harm effect, then the impact is opposite. In scenario B, where the activist does not monitor the firm, in this case, the firm will choose to misrepresent. Will always choose to misrepresent and claim the maximum quality. In fact, I find that if the firm chooses to misrepresent in the presence of an activist, it will choose to claim the maximum quality that is technologically feasible. Finally, in stage 1, in this stage,
sorry to interrupt, but you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. So in this stage, so the firm chooses what quality it will produce, and this depends on whether it chooses to truthfully claim, misrepresent, whether it is monitored or not. So if the firm chooses to truthfully claim, the optimal quality is given by SA star. On the other hand, if it chooses to misrepresent and the activist does not monitor, then the optimal quality provided by the firm is 0. And finally, if the firm chooses to misrepresent and the activist monitors the firm, then the optimal quality is obtained by equating the first order condition to 0. So what also we find that only if for G values, this is the cost effectiveness of the firm in providing higher quality of credence attribute. Only for these values, the firm will choose to misrepresent, and the optimal quality, as I mentioned, is obtained by equating this to 0. So result 2, we find that firm H will find it optimal to misrepresent when it faces lower reputational harm and when it is less cost effective in providing higher quality. And also the optimal quality provided by the firm when it chooses to misrepresent is strictly greater than the quality it provides when it makes fraudulent quality claims in the absence of an activist, and is strictly lower than the quality it would provide when it truthfully claims. So it lies in between. So to conclude my study, so we find that when the CSR investments of the firm are relatively low, the activist will find it optimal to monitor the firm or to target the firm, basically. The firm H will find it optimal to misrepresent, even when the activist finds it optimal to monitor the firm. And this happens when it faces lower reputation harm, when it is less, when the cost of producing credence attribute is higher for that firm, when it produces lower quality, and when it can claim a higher quality. And with regards to the impact of CSR on the decision to misrepresent, we find that it depends on whether CSR reputation harm effect dominates the CSR campaign effect. And also, we find that the optimal quality provided by the firm when it's monitored by the activist and it chooses to misrepresent is higher than the optimal quality it would provide in the absence of an activist, and it is less than the optimal quality it will provide when it chooses to truthfully claim. Another interesting result we found is that the basic good firm does not have any incentive to collaborate with the activists or to expose the high quality firm. This is because if the reputation harm rises, the degree of product differentiation between the two firms decreases and the profits of low quality firm reduces. Thank you.
That was perfect timing. So I think it's Q&A time. If anyone has any questions for Anubrata. Do we have any questions? If not, I think we can move to the next speaker, right, host?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who is the next host? Who is the next speaker? I don't know who the speakers are in the group.
I would just allow the next volunteer to go, the next presenter. You guys can technically just make up your order if that's what's
Who
works.
are the presenters though? I know I'm one of them, and then we just have one presenter, but who are the presenters?
Let me look that up just a moment.
I'm also the presenter.
Okay, do you want to present next, Junho?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so since I'm the moderator, you have 15 minutes, and then would be 3 minutes of Q&A, but you can go ahead and start.
Yeah, so can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, my name is Junho Chen and I'm a PhD candidate in Food and Resource Economics at University of Florida. And my co-authors of these papers are Dr. Gao and Yifan. So the title of my presentation is modeling the joint decision on consumer store selection and product choice. So here is the outline of my presentation today. So first is the introduction. So what is joint decision? So when you decide to go on a grocery shopping trip, you mainly face two choice scenario. The food choice and the grocery store selection. However, it is now clear that whether the food choice dominates your decision or grocery store selection does. So for example, sometimes I just want to buy some Asian groceries. In that case, food choice dominates my grocery shopping trip. However, other times I don't have a specific grocery shopping list, then I only need to decide which store to go and then just buy the food there. So I guess some of you may relate to these scenarios in your daily life. So this brings me to wonder how to estimate this joint decision. Does food choice or store selection has more weights in one's grocery shopping trip? So if we can understand which one may have more impact, the results can help food retailers to decide how to develop their stores. In general, food retailers face two strategies, whether they should develop their stores from the product perspective, like expanding the food categories and diversifying food choices in the store, or from the overall store perspective, like adding or improving the store features by taking advantage of technology development or promoting the cooperative social responsibility. So the motivation for this paper is that food choice and grocery store selection are actually dependent to each other. There exists a joint decision, and we want to identify whether there is a way to measure this joint decision. So the objective of this paper is first to integrate food choice and grocery store selection together to understand whether consumers make a decision because of a need for certain products or their preference for certain stores. Then we want to examine the joint decision between those two choice scenarios. So moving on to the literature review. So those papers here confirm that food choice and store selection are dependent to each other. So this paper here talk about that product purchase behavior correlates with the store selection, and grocery store types will impact people's motivation to buy different food. So for example, when people want to purchase fruits and vegetables, shopping at different types of grocery store depends on the store marketing characteristics. And here it talks about that people have higher willingness to pay for organic food and fresh format stores and supercenters. So after reviewing those topics in the literature, we find the literature gap that few have examined the bidirectional relationship by putting the food choice and grocery store selection context together, since most studies assume those two are independent. So the contribution of this paper is first to model the joint decision between food choice and grocery store selection. Secondly, we want to analyze the interaction effect between those two. So to examine the joint decision, we designed a consumer survey, and there are three main categories there. The first one is about the general questions. So in the survey, we ask people about their food shopping behavior, their motivation for visiting a grocery store, and their perception of selected grocery store attributes. And the second part, which is also the key part of the survey, is the choice experiment. So we have the choice experiments on both grocery store selection and food choice, and we have two scenarios there. And the last part is about the demographic characteristics. So where we ask people about their gender, education level, and other demographic features. So for the people who are eligible to take this survey are those who are over 18 years old and are also the primary shoppers for household groceries. For the choice experiment design, we use SAS macro to generate the D-optimal design, and the criteria is to minimize the D-error of the parameters. And so after using this criteria, we find the best combination of attributes levels in store CE and food CE. So for the store CE, we have 3 blocks. So each block will have 6 choices. So for each respondent, you can only see 6 store choices. And for the food CE, each respondent will see 8 choices. So here is the attributes in the store CE. So we have 6 store attributes with each with 3 levels. Specifically, we have the ethical labeled food availability to show whether the store care about the corporate social responsibility. And we use the store type here to indicate whether the store take advantage of the high-tech knowledge. For the food choice, we select strawberry as the focal product. Since strawberries are homogeneous product, so very useful to identify different effects. And also US is one of the largest strawberry producers globally, so we think that studying consumer preference for the strawberries can obtain important marketing information for US fresh produce market. So in the survey, we have 4 strawberry attributes, having the price with 4 levels and others with 2 levels. So considering the order effect, we have 2 scenarios. So in the scenario 1, respondent will first see the store CE and then will see the food CE. And in the scenario 2, respondent will first see the food CE and then will see the store CE. And to model the joint decision, we have unconditional choice experiment and conditional choice experiment for both store and strawberry CE. So here is the example of unconditional store CE. So basically, we provide these 3 choices with an opt-out, and we ask them to choose which grocery store they would like to go. And here is an example of the unconditional strawberry CE. Similar as before, we provided 3 options here and ask people to choose which strawberry they would like to buy. So for the conditional CE, here is the case of scenario 1. So after they see the store CE, we will randomly select one from the store choice profile, as you can see here, and we will put it here and ask people, so since if you are shopping at this store, which strawberry will you buy? And same logic here in the scenario 2, after they see the strawberry CE, then we will randomly choose one from the strawberry choice profile and ask people if they are buying this kind of strawberries, which store they would prefer to go. So moving on to the methodology part. So to model the joint decision, we first define how individual obtain his or her utility in one shopping trip. So here is a function that's showing how people obtain the utility by visiting a store S and purchase a product J. So UIS and UIJ is the utility of visiting a store S and purchase the product J. And the UISJ here is the joint decision. So this not only depends on the preference for stores and products, but also depends on the relative weight of the utilities of store and product. So our goal here is to estimate alpha, gamma, and the weights here. So the equation 2 here shows the probability of an individual visit store S instead of store T and purchase the product J instead of K. However, we could not directly estimate the joint probability in equation 2 here because we cannot ask people to choose the store and food simultaneously. So in order to estimate the joint decision, we use the equations 3 and 4 here by the Bayes' rule. So we can use both unconditional and conditional probability to estimate the UISJ. So in the paper, we use the mixed logic models to estimate the individual level coefficients of consumer utility in conditional and unconditional choice experiment and predict the probability of each individual choice of a specific store or a specific product. So using the equations 3 and 4 in the previous slides, we can estimate the joint decision probability. And then after getting those probability, then we can estimate the equation 5 here. So to summarize this whole process, first we will use the mixed logic model on the CE data to obtain the conditional probability and unconditional probability. Then we will combine those probability on both scenarios together and obtain the panel utility data. And lastly, we will use the panel OLS on the panel utility data to estimate the alpha, gamma, and the W there. So we distributed the survey by Qualtrics and the first round of collection happened in March, and this is still ongoing process. The sample is nationally represented, and so far we have 143 valid responses in scenario 1 and 153 valid responses in scenario 2. Here is the demographic statistics in both scenarios. In general, those two groups are very similar regarding to different demographic characteristics. So due to the limited space, so the full table will be in the appendix. So here I only show the attributes here, not the standard deviation. So as we can see that both price level attributes have significant negative impact on consumer preference, and average local food availability and average organic food availability have significant positive impact, and people don't prefer the fully automated store. So here is the mixed logic result for the unconditional strawberry CE. As we can see, all the attributes are significantly affecting consumer preference. And in general, consumers prefer low price and strawberry with all the food labels listed here. And here is the mixed logic results for conditional store CE. Due to the limited space here, so I only show those significant ones in the table. So to estimate the store CE, we have interacted the store attributes with food attributes. So the table here shows that when having a specific strawberries type to buy, people prefer to shop at a close grocery store with low overall price level and high local food availability. As for the
I'm sorry to interrupt, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. So as for the interaction term, only one is significant. This elaborates that if consumers want to buy strawberries carrying the ethical label, they would prefer to shop at the store with high ethical labeled food availability. However, other interaction terms do not have any impact. So here is the mixed logic results for conditional food CE. Similar as before, we interact those food attributes with store attributes to estimate. However, none of the interactions are significant. This table here shows that when people go to a specific store, only food attributes will impact consumer preference on strawberries, not the store attributes. So after getting those conditional and unconditional probability, we have the data for the panel OLS estimation. So here is the result of the joint decision estimate. So we compare the models with and without the interaction terms. So when adding the interaction terms here, food utility and interaction term are significant with positive and negative impact relatively. When we exclude the interaction term in the model, only the food utility significantly impacts the consumer's grocery shopping trip. So to conclude, first in the unconditional probability cases, price level of the store, average local and organic food availability, as well as fully automated store type, those store attributes significantly impact the consumer's preference for stores. So all the strawberry attributes significantly impact consumer preference in the food CE. So in the conditional probability cases, only one interaction term is significant in conditional store CE case. This further explains that the interaction term in the final panel utility estimation has very small impact on the utility of joint decision. As for the joint decision, there is very small bidirectional relationship between food choice and store selection, and food choice mainly dominates the whole trip. So that we can conclude for grocery stores with the emphasis on fresh produced products, it is important to expand food categories and diversify food choices in store to develop rather than focusing on the store attributes. So that will be all for my presentation today. Thank you so much for your attention. Any questions or feedback?
I have a simple question.
Yes, sure.
So do you have any plan for other categories of the items? I mean, you choose a strawberry, but is there any other plan to do another research, or have you included any other items for the CE?
Yes, actually in the survey, we also have the milk as a focal product of the dairy produce. So since this is still ongoing data collection, so we will also do the same analysis on the milk product.
Yeah, I just thought that, I mean, depending on the product, I mean, the effect will be different. So maybe
Yes.
go over another categories of the items will be helpful to understand the results, I guess.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for the feedback.
I have a question. It's a really good presentation. So previous studies, they have separated decision, store choice and food choice. They assume that they were independent. So what I'm thinking about the implications of your findings in terms of interpreting what the results of previous studies. When they look at what are the factors that explain the store choice, for example.
You mean, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking, so what your results will mean for the studies that I have looked at the factors that affect store choice, given that they assume that both decisions are independent, food choice and store choice, they assume to be independent. So you showed us that it's not really store characteristics what it matter, but instead food characteristics. So I wonder I wonder the previous evidence. I wonder what does your study means for like past evidence, like the implications of that on of your study in terms of what other studies they have shown. Like, are they overestimating the value of the factors that they evaluated? I don't know. It's just something that I just throw out of there because I don't know the answer.
I think their result may not be overestimated since we focus on different area. So here I assume that those two choices are dependent. So I designed the survey to try to capture that dependent relationship, like bidirectional relationship. I think previous studies, they designed the survey by assuming the independent choice. So I think it's just different design and different areas. So I cannot say that they may overestimate. I just think that maybe we have different areas. Does that answer your question?
We are out of time, by the way.
Sorry. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
So I think we have the information that the next presenter or the next speaker could be Bindu. Bindu, are you in the session? I don't see. Okay, maybe Yoon-Suk.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to present next?
Yes. Yeah. I'm ready.
Okay, let's get started. Okay, you have 15 minutes to present and then 3 minutes Q&A.
Yes. All right. My name is Hyun-Suk Kim, and I'm working at Korea Development Institute (KDI), and this work is done with Giancarlo Moschini at Iowa State University. And I'm glad to give a presentation eventually. The paper I want to present today is titled by Emission Control by Voluntary Agreements, Oligopoly Market with Green Consumers. Let me briefly explain about the background. So, as you know well, the environmental policy instrument can be categorized in two categories. One is the economic incentive instrument, and the other one is a command and control type instrument. And voluntary agreements, VAs in short, belong to the economic incentive instrument, and it actually rely on commitments by participants to go beyond the regulation voluntarily. So this is a kind of a typical type of the voluntary agreements that this paper, our paper, deal with. One important feature is the target. So such voluntary agreement have a certain industry level target without any individual specific target. And there's a small number of participant firms. And one important feature is the sanction parts. So there's no explicit sanction. There is only implicit threat of the legislation. And another feature is the certification scheme. So in order to join in a voluntary agreement, this type of the voluntary agreement, the firms are required to use some specific type of technology or introduce some equipment. So this is kind of the typical voluntary agreement. So firms are agreed to reduce some kind of the harmful outputs in an aggregate way. So there has been a wide use of the voluntary agreements. There are more than 300 distinguishable VAs across the 18 countries based on the OECD database. And in the US, there has been an increasing number of voluntary agreements. So the main question is, why are firms participating in VA? So there are twofold motivations based on the literature. One is to avoid a possible alternative policy, which can be a tax policy. And the other motivation is to improve industrial reputation by appealing to the green consumers. In the literature, there's a line of literature on the green consumers, so dealing with the vertical product differentiation. And this type of literature doesn't really consider a specific type of the VA. And there's another line of the literature dealing with the regulatory threat, especially in the VAs. So this literature considers VAs in their models. So all those are theoretical models. And we are arguing that in reality, firms participate in the VA by considering green consumers together with the regulatory threat. Actually, through the participating in the VA, some VAs have their own labeling schemes and some VAs have direct labelation scheme. So through the VAs, consumers will know about the performance of the firms. So green consumer motivation coexists with the regulatory threat motivation. So in this paper, we are dealing with the multiple firms case, and especially we deal with the VA, which is aiming to reduce industry-wide emissions. And also, firms are required to use some new technology in order to join a VA. And also, we specifically considered the self-enforcing equilibrium for the participation decision following the literature. So we set up the equilibrium model. And then, because we cannot obtain the closed form solution for the VA situation, and we go to the numerical simulation and try to figure out the major implication of the models. This is a typical textbook model for the product differentiation. So we consider the multiple firm situation and identical firms. And we consider the constant marginal cost, constant marginal emissions, but for the new technology, the marginal cost is greater than that of the old technology. But the marginal emissions are smaller for the new technology compared to the old one. And consumer side, there's uniformly distributed consumers. And one important feature is the small u is determined by the y. The y represents the purchase. So if there is a purchase, then y is equal to 1. And there's no purchase, and y is equal to 0. And one important thing is, if the product is made by the new technology, there is additional gain for the consumers. So as S, theta. So S is given, theta is a taste parameter for the consumers. So as long as the theta is greater, then the additional gain will be greater. And also we introduced some minimal assumptions, which makes the situation more interesting. So the first part is at least for the consumers who has a highest willingness to pay, the additional gain is greater than the additional cost. And for the normalized cost, this is normalized by the utility, the small u level. And the cost for the new technology is still expensive for compared to the old one. So we consider tax game and VA game, and those two games are consist of 4 stages. Regulator chooses some certain level of tax rate for the tax game in order to meet some target level of the aggregate emission level, and announce that the T will be imposed in the stage 4. And then stage 2 first chooses technology, which is captured by Nash equilibrium. And in stage 3, firms do quantity competition and also determined by the Nash equilibrium. But the VA game, the regulator announces that the target level is some certain level, E upper bar V, and there's a threat, the tau. Tau is announced, and tau will be levied in stage 4 if enough, the participants are not enough. And stage 2 and 3 are kind of similar, but in the stage 3, firms decide whether to join in a VA or not. And we look at the self-reinforcing equilibrium here. And in the stage 4, if the target is met, then tax is exempted, but otherwise the tau, which is announced in stage 1, is levied. And especially for the VA game, we consider 2 cases. The first one is a pre-commitment case. So any tau is credible. So government can bluff. I mean, they announce a really severe tau level, they can make the VA successful in any case. But there's another case, time consistency case. So tau should be equal to T. The T is the level of the tax rate is chosen in tax game. So the tax level should be consistent between those 2 games. So more restrictive case. Let me go briefly over the equilibrium outcome. So based on the setting, we can calculate the equilibrium outputs and equilibrium profits. And one condition for the equilibrium is that this equation. So one intersection, because of the Kruner competition feature, we can figure out the explicit closed form solution for the NNTT using this equation. And because we obtain the closed form solution, we can do the comparative statistics based on the solutions. And proposition 1 describes this equilibrium outcomes. Actually, we are interested in the interior solutions, but we describes the boundary issues too. Yeah, and this is the VA game. The one thing is that we dealing with the situation that T is equal to 0. That means a laissez-faire case. There's no policies. But in order to meet the target, the number of the green firms, the NN, which is the number of the firms using new technology, we are saying that green firms. If the number of the green firms increases, then the aggregate level of the emission under the VA game will decrease. So based on the equilibrium schedules, under the equilibrium schedule, if the number of the green firm increases, then total emission level will decrease, so we can achieve the targets. So that's the feature of the VA game. So this is a graphical description of the equilibrium in stage 2. So if the threat level under the tau prime is not strong, then it guarantees the higher level of the profit. But if the
Sorry to interrupt, but you have 4 minutes.
All right. The tau 2 prime is too severe, then there's a room to get a higher profit under the VA. So in this case, the VA is profitable. And actually the free riding behavior, because whenever the number of the green firm increases, then the profit level will be greater for the free rider, non-participants. So it's a stable. So we can describe the equilibrium number of the participants like this. And this proposition 2 and 3 describes the outcome under the VA for the 2 cases, PC and TC. And this is proposition 4 describes all the equilibriums under the model. And we go over the numerical simulation based on some reasonable numbers. And this is the one example of the equilibrium. And one thing I want to mention here is that the welfare is greater under the VA comparing those 3 cases. But the threat level, this is VA failure is a threat case. The threat cases should be severe, and you can see the tax policy, the profit is actually greater than the threat case. So the VA is not successful in this case. And we do the simulation for the $100,000. And then you can see that in the pre-commitment situation, the VA can be successful and yield the highest welfare level, but the time-consistent cases, the VA is not really welfare maximizing because the threat is not enough to guarantee the VA successful. So the conclusion is like this. So the VA might be welfare enhancing in some cases, especially if the market is less competitive, which means that underproduction problems is severe. But because of the free riding behavior, VA can hurt consumers who have a lower willingness to pay for green products by leaving them to the non-participant firms like free riders. So this is a we're thinking that this is an important implication about this model. And also the VA have a clear potential as an instrument for the emission reduction, but there is implementing issues remain. So the credibility is really important. If not credible, and then the time consistency should be maintained, then VA is less successful that's in our setup. So that's the what I prepared today. So thank you. Is there any question?
Thank you. We have 3 minutes for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I mean, later you can email me if you have any question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Bindu is also another presenter. Anubrata has already presented. Bindu Paudel is not here. Junhong Chen, I think she presented, and then Yoon-sung presented, and then it's me. So if Bindu Paudel is not here, I think I should go ahead and present. What do you think, host?
That sounds like a good idea. I thought I saw them on here earlier, but I could be wrong. So if they join after you, that's okay.
Is there anyone else who is presenting in this group?
Not that I'm aware of, unless if anybody else knows.
Anyone in the participants that is supposed to speak and hasn't spoken yet?
I don't believe so.
My. Okay, so next, I think I will present, and I'll set my timer and everything. You should be able to see my screen now. Okay, so do you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kiana Yektansani. I'm a clinical assistant professor at University of Illinois at Chicago. So today I'm going to talk about using machine learning techniques to predict consumers' environmental attitudes and beliefs. So why do we want to bother with all of this? So it's important for politicians to measure public support before implementing a policy. So when they know people's standpoints, which is the focus of this study, politicians can avoid a lot of resistance costs that can arise from an environmental policy that is not backed by support. For example, you might have heard of the Yellow Vest movement that started in France in 2018 in response to higher fossil fuel taxes. It got extremely violent, and eventually the French government had to cancel the fossil fuel tax increase. Canada was in a similar position because of the backlash against increasing carbon taxes. And it was mentioned in Politica that the president needs to figure out how much and how quickly Canadians actually want climate change. So it's important for politicians to know where people stand before enacting an environmental policy. Similarly, for green producers, targeting a specific marketing strategy to potential green consumers who have higher environmental willingness to pay, higher awareness, is more efficient than delivering the same strategy to the entire population. So poorly designed marketing methods, product features can be very costly for green producers. And this was the case for Whirlpool, which is a home appliance company, when they realized consumers were not willing to pay a premium for CFC-free refrigerators because they didn't know what CFC was. So that's why in this paper, we are going to focus on that. The literature has paid a lot of attention to the factors that can potentially affect environmental beliefs and environmental actions and attitudes. For example, these factors in different papers, sometimes contradicting each other, but have been mentioned as income, education, political views, altruistic values, demographics, gender, are some of the factors. So other than the occasional contradictory results, these findings are useful when and if the government has the means and intentions to change them. For example, developing public educational programs. However, a lot of times in reality, what matters most is identifying the final value of consumers' orientation rather than the forces that shape them, the forces that affect them. So, and this has been missing in the literature. None of these papers have focused on predicting these values on a new data set or part of the data set that hasn't been trained, that hasn't been used to build the model. And that is the focus here. This study aims to fill this gap by focusing on predicting individuals' orientations. So the officials can use the information and methodology in this paper to identify citizens that are more likely to oppose a policy. And then depending on the portion of population that fall into that category, the government may decide to proceed with the policy or they may decide to overturn it. So the goal is not to change people, the population, it's just to be able to predict their standpoint. Similarly, green firms can use these prediction results for market segmentation, to deliver tailored marketing strategies and product characteristics to increase profit and better serve their consumers' needs. We use 4 different techniques to compare them in different settings to make different predictions. These methods are pretty inexpensive and they have pretty high predictive powers, as we will see. The methods are logistic regression, random forest boosting, and neural networks. So this is the empirical model. We have our X's are a set of independent variables that capture the respondent's characteristics, and Y is the response variable, which measures respondents' environmental beliefs and preferences. So this could be their policy stance, their beliefs about climate change, whether or not they would want to buy a home appliance product. So our goal is to predict Y using those set of characteristics, using those X. So we'll have Y hat as a function of F would be f hat of x, and then f hat, so y would be a function of f, but then f hat is our estimate of that function, and y hat is our prediction of y. So in machine learning and in this study, f hat is treated as a black box. So we are not concerned about the particular functional form of f hat, but what matters is that f hat provides an accurate prediction of y, how individual independent variables are associated with the dependent variable, how individual x's are affecting y is not the focus here. Again, our goal is to predict that final value. We divide our data set into a training data set and a test data set. So to do that, the observations in the training data set are used to train the model. So we randomly select 70% of our data set and we put them in the training data set to train our model. And then the remaining 30%, the test data set that had been withheld, is going to be used for testing the model, saying whether how good our model is in predicting. So the first classifier that we use is logistic regression. So logistic regression, I'm not going to spend much time on the classifiers, but just very briefly speaking, rather than modeling the response variable, logistic regression models the probability that y belongs to a particular category. So, and then logistic regression finds this category, and then we would need a threshold. So if our threshold is, let's say 0.5, then we are going to predict that y is equal to 1 if the probability is bigger than 0.5. And then that threshold can change depending on the cost of misclassification and then whether our data is imbalanced or not. So for example, if the cost of incorrectly classifying someone as environmentally conscious is high, let's say we live in a country like France that could lead to a lot of protests, then we can be more conservative and choose a higher value for our classifier. We can choose 0.7 for our threshold. And then we have random forest, which in which we build a forest of trees, and each tree is going to have a prediction. And again, we can use the majority vote or a different threshold and decide that what would be the final classification for our model. The next classifier is boosting. Again, it's a tree-based model. Each tree is pretty small, and then they don't have that many branches, that many nuts. And then every time that a tree is grown, we use the previously grown tree's mistakes into account. Those mistakes get a higher weight to make sure that in the next tree, they are classified properly. And then we have the neural networks, which are influenced by how actual human brains work. We have 3 different types of layers. The inputs are our predictors, and then we have a hidden layer or more than one hidden layer. And then we have the output, which are depends on the number of classes that we have. So how are we going to evaluate the classifiers? There are different scales, different things that we can look at. One is the specificity, which is also called the true negative rate. It's a fraction of environmentally insensible that are correctly classified as such. And this is equal to 1 minus type 1 error. And then we have sensitivity, which is also called the true positive rate, and it's the portion of environmentally conscious that are correctly classified as such. And this would be 1 related to type 2 error. So this would be 1 minus type 2 error. And then we have accuracy, which is the percentage of correct classifications. And A, B, C, D are like basically the number of individuals in each cell. Another factor that we can look at to look at the power of our model is the ROC curve. The higher is the value of the area under this curve, the better is our model. So we basically want our curve to reach that top left corner as much as possible. That shows that we have a high sensitivity and a low value of 1 minus the specificity, or basically high sensitivity and high specificity. That is ideal for us. So the higher is the area under curve, AUC, it signals a better classifier. So the data in this model are taken from round 8 of the European Social Survey that was conducted in 2016. The result was released in 2018. It happens through face-to-face interviews, and then respondents answer questions about their political views, climate change, welfare, health, and other things. So to choose our predictors, we try to look at the major predictors in econometrics studies, and we also used if we had the data for something that didn't have that much missing data, I included that as part of the predictors. They couldn't hurt the model. So how our prediction results look like. So the first one is attitude towards an environmental tax policy. So this option directly measures policy stance. So what they think of increasing taxes on fossil fuels. So they could be strongly in favor, somewhat in favor, all the way to strongly against the policy. And as you can see, we, for example, boosting has a specificity of around 0.72, which means that it can correctly classify 72% of anti-tax respondents, while correctly classifying more than half of tax supporters. The sensitivity is around 0.5 for boosting. Random forest correctly classifies about 70% of tax supporters, while correctly classifying more than half of tax supporters. So in every one of these classifications, we choose our threshold such that the model in each of the categories is not doing worse than random guessing. So at least they are guessing half and half in environmentally sensible or environmentally insensible case, and then they are correctly classifying 70%, 80% in the other category. So which one of these methods is better? Again, that would depend on cost of incorrectly classifying tax opposers as tax supporters. So for example, if the cost of incorrectly classifying tax opposers as supporters is high, for example, in a country like France, then we should use boosting to have a high value of a specificity. So that is the approach. But if, on the other hand, the cost of misclassifying tax supporters as opposers is high, then we can use random forest instead of boosting. And so in this other graph, I have what if we use only the top 3 predictors. So this is first is showing the most important predictors are age, how much time they spend following news about politics and current affairs, years of education, and their opinion on whether people are mostly helpful or selfish. So as you can see, these are not environmental features. We didn't include environmental preferences in there as part of the predictors. So kind of shows the strength of the model. And then in this other table, we use just the top 3 features, which would be age, how much time they spend on news, and years of education as the predictors. And as you can see, still the model is doing an okay job. Even if we only have 3 predictors, 3 information for 3 of the characteristics, this model is not doing an awful job. But then, of course, not as well as the case where we have more information. Next category is when respondents choose the, between whether they would want to buy energy efficient home appliances. And then we group the first 5 categories as the ones that are unlikely to buy green goods, and then categorize them as 0. And then the next 5 ones as those that are likely to buy green goods. And as you can see, our data here is pretty biased. It's pretty imbalanced because it's a European survey. Europeans are usually a lot more environmentally friendly than many other countries are, and that makes our predictions a bit more difficult. So, but despite that, our model doesn't do an awful job here. Random forest can correctly classify 75% of people who are unlikely to buy green goods, while still doing better than half, while still classifying more than half of the other category. So again, this one also have useful information for green producers. They might incur a lot of unnecessary costs if they develop and implement an expensive advertising program to, let's say, educate or deliver their market to people who are already aware customers. So again, based on that, based on like which category is having a high cost, we can use either of random forest or logistic regression. Again, that imbalance in our data is kind of messing up our boosting. It has a very, very high sensitivity, but even with different threshold values, it had a low value of a specificity. Again, the most important predictors seem to be coming, same things repeating: age, how much time they spend following news, and how often they do things to reduce the energy use, followed by education. And then when we use the top three features, this is how our predictors, how our strategies, methods work. This category is about belief about climate change. We have climate change skeptics, those that think climate is definitely not changing, probably not changing, and climate change believers, those that think is probably changing and definitely changing. Again, you see that we have such little data in climate change skeptics that makes our data set very imbalanced. So in this case, boosting correctly identifies about 76% of climate change skeptics, while correctly classifies more than half of climate change believers. Random forest has about 74% chance of correctly classifying climate change believers. It has a sensitivity of 74%, and since it has a specificity of 78%, it means that it does, and more than half of climate change skeptics are correctly classified. Again, most important predictors are shown here, and when we use just the top three predictors, this is how our model works, which is still pretty good. Like our random forest still has a sensitivity of 70% and specificity of 78%. Boosting is the other way around. And lastly, beliefs about the share of anthropogenic climate change, whether they think it's entirely climate change is caused entirely by human activity, mainly by human activity, or I don't think climate change is happening. This question was not asked from people who answered, I don't think climate is changing, to the last question, but still you see that some people chose that last option here. And then the prediction results are shown in the table, which are, the models have similar powers in predicting different environmental attitudes and beliefs. Again, with the top three predictors, we have this table on the bottom and concluding remarks. So it seems like our model can correctly classify, we are able to correctly classify 74% of climate change skeptics and around more than 70% in different categories, and then while correctly classifying more than half in the other category, and different methods would do differently. Different models have different strengths depending on different data sets for sure, but then it seems like random forest and boosting seem to outdo other predictors. So it shows that different classifiers should be used in different settings when depending on the imbalance in our data set and depending on the misclassification cost. Age, years of education, time spent following political news, happiness, and their altruistic beliefs are important predictors in this setting. Thank you, everyone. I think I went over a little over my time, but thanks for listening. If anyone has any questions. Again, feel free to send me an email if you want to further discuss this, or if you want to ask a question or anything.